The courtroom had seen arrogance before, but never anything like this. What began as a routine dispute instantly transformed into one of the most explosive moments in daytime television. Karen Mitchell, a woman already infamous in her community for her entitled outbursts, crossed a line no one dared to imagine. In front of millions of viewers under the unblinking studio lights, she pointed her finger directly at Judge Judy and hurled the accusation that froze the room. "You only rule against people like me because you're racist." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every stunned expression. Even the bailiff, seasoned by decades of tense hearings, shifted uncomfortably at the unprecedented charge. For a moment, Judge Judy said nothing, her sharp eyes locked on Karen as if weighing the weight of the words just spoken. But every viewer at home felt it. This was no ordinary case anymore. This wasn't about small claims, property disputes, or petty neighborhood arguments. This was about character, truth, and the dangerous gamble of weaponizing accusations. Karen, however, misread the silence. She smirked, believing she had gained the upper hand. What she didn't know was that her reckless outburst had just set the stage for the most devastating takedown in Judge Judy's career. Because while Karen thought she had exposed bias, she had no idea that her own comments, shocking, cruel, and deeply offensive, were about to be exposed on live television. And what came next didn't just humiliate her. It turned her into a national symbol of hypocrisy. Karen Mitchell hadn't just walked into the courtroom that day. She had strutted in, every step a performance rehearsed for weeks. Her blonde highlights were fresh from the salon, her blazer carefully chosen to project authority, and her designer handbag clutched like a trophy. To her, this wasn't a trial. It was a stage, and she intended to make herself the star. The case itself was nothing remarkable on paper. A simple dispute, the kind Judge Judy had presided over thousands of times. Yet Karen had convinced herself it was bigger than that. She wasn't here merely to win a judgment. She was here to prove a point. She believed she was smarter than America's toughest judge, more persuasive than any evidence, and shrewd enough to bend the system in her favor. She even bragged to friends and neighbors that she would use the courtroom to show the world who Judy really was. Behind the bench, Judge Judy studied Karen with the quiet patience of someone who had seen it all. Decades on the family court bench, tens of thousands of cases, and an uncanny ability to sense manipulation from the moment a litigant opened their mouth. Judy had earned her reputation as a human lie detector, and in those first minutes, she recognized the type immediately. A litigant who believed attitude could substitute for facts. But Karen's misplaced confidence wasn't built on evidence. It was built on delusion. She had spent nights practicing comebacks in front of the mirror, scrolling through online forums to cobble together pseudo-legal arguments, and convincing herself that the audience would side with her once she framed Judy as unfair. To her, the cameras weren't a threat. They were an opportunity. She imagined the headlines, the viral clips, the admiration of those who would see her as a fearless woman standing up against authority. What she didn't realize was that Judge Judy had already begun piecing together the truth. With every arrogant glance, every smug smirk, every unnecessary flourish in Karen's answers, the judge was cataloging not just a case, but a pattern. And as Karen basked in her illusion of control, the audience could feel the storm quietly forming on the horizon. Because this wasn't the story of a woman exposing injustice. It was the story of arrogance, walking straight into a trap, one that Judy had been setting from the very first question. It didn't take long for Karen's arrogance to move from confidence into outright disrespect. Judge Judy asked a straightforward question, one that should have been answered with simple facts. Instead, Karen leaned back in her chair, rolled her eyes for all to see, and launched into a monologue dripping with condescension. Her tone wasn't just defensive. It was laced with the kind of contempt reserved for someone who believes the person across from them is beneath them. The audience murmured, sensing the tension rising. Judy's expression remained unreadable, but her eyes sharpened, watching every word, every exaggerated gesture. Still, Karen pressed on. She dismissed the plaintiff's account with a smirk, insinuated that the entire proceeding was biased, and then delivered the line that would send shockwaves through the courtroom. "You always rule against people like me. Admit it. It's because you're racist." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Gasps rippled through the room, rippled through the rows of spectators. Even the cameras hesitated, zooming in to capture the sheer audacity etched across Karen's face. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was an accusation. One aimed not just at Judge Judy, but at the very integrity of the courtroom itself. Judy didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on Karen with a weight that only decades of authority could command. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until the tension was nearly unbearable. The bailiff shifted slightly, as though bracing for the explosion everyone expected. But still, Judy said nothing. Karen, mistaking the silence for hesitation, smiled smugly. She thought she had caught Judy off guard. She believed she had flipped the power dynamic. In her mind, she had just painted herself as a victim, and Judy as the villain. What Karen didn't know was that she had just walked into the very center of the trap. Because if there's one thing Judge Judy never tolerated, it was manipulation dressed as righteousness. And she was about to show Karen and the millions watching what happens when arrogance tries to masquerade as justice. The accusation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, thick and impossible to ignore. Everyone expected Judge Judy to strike back instantly, to unleash the kind of fury that had humbled thousands of arrogant litigants before. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her hands folded neatly on the bench, and spoke with a calmness that was more unnerving than anger. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said evenly, her voice steady and deliberate, "are you certain you want to continue down this road?" The audience held their breath. Karen blinked, surprised by the restraint. In her mind, this was proof that she had landed a blow. Smirking, she doubled down, raising her voice, speaking over Judy's measured tone, insisting that the court was biased against her, that she represented people who never get a fair shot. Each word she spoke dug her deeper into the hole she didn't realize she was creating. Judy, unshaken, scribbled a note on her pad and nodded ever so slightly. The cameras caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the telltale sign that she had just made a decision. What Karen mistook for hesitation was in fact calculation. Judy wasn't about to let the outburst slide. She was building a foundation layer by layer for the precise moment when the truth would crush Karen's entire performance. The silence between Karen's rants became a weapon. Judy allowed her to ramble, to trap herself in contradictions, to show the world exactly who she was without interruption. Every time Karen thought she had seized control, Judy's calm demeanor reminded the audience where the real power rested. Those who had watched Judy for decades recognized the signs immediately. The slight narrowing of her eyes, the patience that felt less like tolerance and more like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The trap was already set, and Karen was walking deeper into it with every smug sentence. What Karen didn't know was that Judy's producers had already pulled records, statements, and footage from Karen's past, and soon those receipts would shatter her false narrative in front of the entire nation. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly, almost too quietly for Karen to notice. Judge Judy lifted her gaze from the note she had been making and signaled toward the court assistant. A folder was placed in front of her, thick with pages, transcripts, and printed screenshots. Judy flipped it open, her expression unreadable, and then looked directly at Karen. "You've made a serious accusation," Judy said firmly. "So let's look at the facts. Not your story, not your feelings. The facts. Karen shifted uneasily, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge pulled out a page and began to read aloud lines from an HOA meeting transcript where Karen had referred to certain neighbors in language so ugly, so unmistakably prejudiced, that the audience erupted in audible gasps. Karen's face flushed as whispers filled the room. Judy didn't stop there. She moved on to printed screenshots, social media posts, comments that Karen had written under her own name, posts that mocked immigrants, disparaged entire communities, and revealed a pattern of behavior that stripped her earlier accusation of any credibility. The irony was undeniable. The woman who had just accused Judy of racism was now being exposed as the one with a history of racist remarks. Karen tried to interrupt, stammering about context, claiming it was all taken out of proportion. But Judy silenced her with a single raised hand. The judge's voice cut through the noise, sharp and deliberate. You don't get to hide behind accusations when your own words condemn you. The camera zoomed in on Karen's face. Gone was the smug grin. In its place was the dawning realization that her performance was collapsing. Every receipt, Judy revealed, was another brick in the wall closing in around her. The audience no longer viewed her as a victim. They saw her for what she truly was, a hypocrite caught in the very trap she thought she had set for someone else. For the millions watching at home, it was the exact kind of moment that keeps them glued to their screens. The shocking reversal. The instant when arrogance crumbles under the weight of truth. And if you believe truth always finds its way out, comment the word exposed right now. Because what just happened made history in Judge Judy's courtroom. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. Just moments before, Karen believed she was steering the narrative, painting herself as a victim of bias. Now her own words, cold, undeniable, and preserved in black and white, were echoing back at her. Each one louder than the last. The audience, once silent with shock, began to murmur with outrage. Heads shook in disbelief. Gasps turned into whispers, and whispers into open condemnation. In the plaintiff's chair sat Maria Rodriguez, her eyes brimming with tears. For years, she had endured Karen's harassment. Letters filled with threats, condescending remarks about her heritage, and the kind of hostility that corrodes a family's sense of safety. With Judy's exposure of Karen's comments, Maria finally found her voice. Shaking, she rose and addressed the court. This is the woman who called my children names. This is the woman who told me people like us didn't belong in her neighborhood. Her voice cracked, but the truth carried more weight than any polished speech. The audience broke into applause, unable to contain their support. Even the cameras captured faces strewn with emotion. Viewers at home, no doubt, felt the same surge of righteous anger. For Karen, the moment was devastating. She slammed her hand on the table, insisting it was all lies, begging Judy to rein her authority back in. But the harder she fought, the deeper her credibility sank. Judge Judy remained still, letting the uproar speak for itself. When she finally raised her hand, the courtroom fell silent instantly. Her eyes locked onto Karen. Not with anger, but with the kind of icy authority that demanded absolute obedience. The problem isn't my court, Mrs. Mitchell, she said coldly. The problem is you. Karen's composure was unraveling. She muttered excuses, reached for explanations that no one was buying, and cast desperate glances at the audience, hoping to find sympathy. But there was none. The courtroom, once her stage, had turned into her prison. And every spectator, every viewer, every voice in that room stood firmly on the other side. It was no longer Judge Judy versus Karen. It was the truth versus hypocrisy. And Karen was losing on every front. The tension in the courtroom had reached its breaking point. The audience was united against Karen. The plaintiff's testimony had struck a chord, and the evidence of Karen's hypocrisy was undeniable. All eyes turned to Judge Judy. waiting for her to deliver the verdict that everyone sensed was coming. The silence before her words was heavier than any gavel. Judy leaned forward, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Mrs. Mitchell, you accused this court of racism. You pointed your finger at me and declared that truth and justice do not live here. But let me remind you, truth doesn't need defending. It reveals itself, and today, it revealed you." Karen shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting together as though trying to wring an escape from the inevitable. Judy's tone hardened. "You don't get to smear others with accusations when your own record is riddled with prejudice. You don't get to weaponize lies in a place where truth is sacred." The audience erupted into applause, but Judy raised her hand, silencing them as swiftly as she had silenced Karen. Her ruling was delivered with finality. The plaintiff is awarded full damages. "Mrs. Mitchell, your behavior in this courtroom and your documented record have destroyed any credibility you thought you had. You leave here today with nothing except the consequences of your own words." The gavel came down, the sound echoing like thunder. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a public execution of arrogance. Karen's face flushed crimson, her composure shattered. She stood abruptly, sputtering protests, but the bailiff's firm step toward her was enough to halt her defiance. The cameras caught her trembling, caught the tears she had fought to suppress, caught the exact moment arrogance broke under the weight of accountability. For the audience, for the millions watching at home, it was the climax they had been waiting for. Justice wasn't just served. It was carved into stone, delivered with Judy's legendary precision. Karen had walked into the courtroom convinced she would expose bias. Instead, she had been exposed piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. And as Judy sat down her pen and folded her hands once more, her expression carried the message louder than words. Respect the truth, or be destroyed by it. The case may have ended in the courtroom, but its shockwaves traveled far beyond those four walls. Within hours of airing, clips of Karen's accusation and Judy's devastating rebuttal flooded social media. The moment Karen hurled the word racist at Judge Judy, was replayed endlessly, followed immediately by the receipts that exposed her own prejudiced comments. Side-by-side comparisons circulated online with captions that cut to the core. "Accuser becomes the accused." Hashtags erupted across platforms. "Karen exposed" trended worldwide within minutes, followed closely by "Teacher receipts don't lie." Viewers posted their own reactions, some laughing at Karen's downfall, others expressing outrage at her hypocrisy, and many praising Judy for her calm dismantling of the false narrative. Memes appeared overnight, freezing Karen's smug smirk in one frame and her tearful collapse in the next. The fallout didn't stop at the internet. Local news stations picked up the story, labeling it one of the most humiliating takedowns in courtroom television history. Talk shows debated the cultural impact of weaponizing accusations without evidence. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing how Judy had turned the accusation back on the accuser with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Karen's own life began to unravel. Neighbors who had once tolerated her outbursts distanced themselves. HOA members convened an emergency meeting not only to remove her from leadership, but to discuss potential civil action. Families who had suffered under her hostile remarks came forward with renewed courage, emboldened by seeing her finally face consequences. For Maria Rodriguez and her family, the episode brought long-awaited relief. The judgment in her favor was more than financial. It was vindication. For years, she had been painted as the troublemaker, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Now, the truth had been broadcast to millions, and for the first time, she felt the weight of injustice lift from her shoulders. By the end of the week, the clip had amassed tens of millions of views. Karen Mitchell had dreamed of becoming viral, but not like this. She was no longer remembered for her case. She was remembered as the woman who accused Judge Judy of racism, only to be destroyed by her own words. The roar of the internet eventually faded. The news cycle moved on, and the courtroom lights dimmed. But the lesson from that day didn't vanish. It grew louder. People weren't just talking about Karen's downfall. They were reflecting on what it meant, because this wasn't just another viral courtroom clip. It was a cautionary tale about the danger of using false accusations as weapons and the inevitable reckoning when truth finally steps into the light. Judge Judy had seen it all before. Arrogance cloaked as righteousness. Entitlement disguised as courage. Manipulation dressed up as moral outrage. But rarely had the hypocrisy been so perfectly exposed in real time for millions to witness. Karen had believed she could shout louder than the facts. She thought she could smear someone else's name to protect her own. And in doing so, she revealed her true self to the entire world. That's why the moment struck such a chord. Viewers weren't just cheering for Judy. They were cheering for accountability. They were cheering for every time they had been lied about, manipulated, or unfairly accused. They were cheering for the idea that no matter how powerful or smug someone may seem, truth still has the final word. Karen had entered that courtroom certain she would expose bias. But by the end, she became the embodiment of the very thing she claimed to fight. Her words betrayed her. Her past condemned her, and her arrogance destroyed her. The courtroom didn't just hand down a ruling that day. It delivered a mirror, forcing Karen to look at the reflection she had spent years avoiding. Judge Judy summed it up best when she said, "Respect isn't optional. Neither is the truth." It wasn't a soundbite. It was a principle, and it's the reason her courtroom continues to resonate with millions around the world. Because in an era where lies spread fast and accusations can ruin lives, moments like this remind us all that facts still matter. Evidence still matters. Integrity still matters. And for everyone watching, the takeaway was clear. Arrogance may walk loudly, but truth walks patiently, and it always arrives. So if you believe in accountability, if you believe that truth should always cut louder than lies, then don't just watch. Be part of this community. Smash that like button so more people see stories where hypocrisy collapses under the weight of facts. Comment below with the word truth if you believe no false accusation can stand forever. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel because every week we bring you real moments where arrogance meets justice and truth has its day in the spotlight. Remember this: lies may trend, but truth is timeless. And as Karen Mitchell learned the hard way, when you weaponize falsehoods, it's... The courtroom camera captured a moment that would break the internet and redefine entitlement. Victoria Ashford Wellington, adorned in diamonds worth more than most people's homes, stood before Judge Judy with an arrogance that only comes from never being told no. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at America's toughest judge as words spilled from her lips that would change her life forever. Look, I don't need a lecture from someone who's essentially a servant to the television network. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into the kind of death stare that had made millionaires crumble on national television. But what happened in the next 47 seconds would transform Victoria from a socialite queen into the most despised woman in America, begging for mercy from the very judge she had just insulted. Before we dive into the complete downfall of the most privileged Karen ever caught on camera, make sure to smash that like button if you're ready to see old money meet new consequences. Hit subscribe, because what Judge Judy reveals about Victoria's dark past will leave you speechless. Trust me, the downfall you're about to witness is so satisfying, you'll want to watch it again and again. But to understand how spectacularly Victoria Ashford Wellington's world was about to collapse, we need to rewind to the moment she walked through those courtroom doors, believing she was untouchable. This was supposed to be just another Tuesday morning in Judge Judy's courtroom, another small claims case, another quick resolution, Another day of television justice. The case file seemed almost boring on the surface. Victoria Ashford Wellington versus Rosa Mendez, a dispute over a designer scarf allegedly stolen by a former housekeeper. The producers had scheduled it as a routine 15-minute segment. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary. They had no idea they were about to capture the most viral courtroom moment in daytime television history. Victoria Ashford Wellington wasn't just wealthy. She embodied generational wealth. Her great-grandfather built an oil empire in the 1920s. Her grandfather expanded into real estate. Her father multiplied the family fortune through hedge funds and political connections. Victoria herself had never worked a single day in her 48 years of life. She didn't need to. The family trust fund generated more in monthly interest than most Americans earned in a year. But money hadn't bought Victoria class, empathy, or basic human decency. Instead, it gave her something far more dangerous: the unshakable belief that other people existed solely to serve her needs, and that consequences were for ordinary people, not for the Ashford Wellingtons. She arrived at the courthouse that morning in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes S-Class, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than Rosa's monthly rent. Diamonds glittered at her neck, wrists, and ears. Designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She swept through the courthouse hallways like visiting royalty, her Louboutin heels clicking against the floor with the rhythm of entitlement. Court staff who encountered her later described her behavior as shockingly dismissive. She snapped her fingers at the security guard, demanding he hurry up with the metal detector. She spoke to the receptionist without looking up from her phone. She even tried to cut the line of people waiting for courtroom assignments, loudly announcing that she didn't have time to wait with everyone else. This was Victoria's normal. How she treated the world every single day. She genuinely believed this behavior wasn't just acceptable, but expected for someone of her status. Sitting across the courtroom was Rosa Mendez, a 42-year-old single mother of 3 who represented everything Victoria looked down upon. Rosa had immigrated to America 15 years earlier with nothing but hope and determination. She had worked as a house cleaner, restaurant server, and hotel maid, whatever it took to provide for her children. 5 years ago, she became Victoria's full-time housekeeper, believing the steady income and benefits would finally give her family some stability. Those 5 years became a masterclass in humiliation. Victoria treated Rosa not as an employee, but as property. She monitored her with cameras, called her at all hours for trivial demands, and criticized everything, from Rosa's accent to her clothes to the way she arranged flowers. Rosa endured it all because she needed the job, because her children needed health care, because single mothers without college degrees don't have the luxury of walking away from a steady paycheck. Until the Christmas party incident. That night, Victoria accused her of theft in front of 50 guests, humiliating her so deeply that Rosa's youngest daughter cried herself to sleep, asking why the mean lady hated her mommy. That was the moment Rosa finally found the courage to quit. And that was when Victoria decided to teach her a lesson, to remind her what happens to servants who forget their place. What neither woman knew was that Judge Judy had spent the previous night. Judge Judy had been doing something she reserved only for special cases. Deep research, background checks, and phone calls to former employees. What she uncovered revealed a pattern of behavior that went far beyond a simple dispute over a designer scarf. She discovered secrets about Victoria that could spark criminal investigations. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just workplace abuse, but a lifetime of privilege weaponized against the powerless. Victoria thought she was entering the courtroom to punish an uppity housekeeper. She had no idea she was about to face the one authority figure in America who didn't care about her last name, her bank account, or her social connections. Judge Judy was ready. and Victoria Ashford Wellington's 48 years of never hearing the word no were about to end in the most public, humiliating, and devastating way imaginable. To truly grasp the magnitude of what was about to unfold in that courtroom, you need to understand exactly who these three people were and what had brought them to this explosive moment. Victoria Ashford Wellington was born into a world most people only see in movies. Her family's Connecticut mansion had 14 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and a staff of 12. She attended elite private schools where tuition cost more than a luxury car. Her 16th birthday party was featured in Town and Country magazine. She summered in the Hamptons, wintered in Aspen, and treated Europe as her personal playground. But what made Victoria truly dangerous was the fact that she had never faced a single real consequence in her entire privileged life. When she failed a class, her father made a donation and suddenly she passed. When she was caught shoplifting as a teenager, the family lawyer made it disappear. She wrecked 3 cars before turning 21. Yet insurance and influence made those problems vanish like smoke. By 48, Victoria had perfected the art of using her wealth as a weapon against anyone she considered beneath her, which, in her mind, meant almost everyone. Her reputation in Greenwich society was legendary for all the wrong reasons. She had gone through 47 housekeepers in just 10 years. That's nearly a new one every 2.5 months. Former employees who dared to speak anonymously described a disturbing pattern of psychological abuse. Victoria would hide items and accuse staff of stealing them. She would deliberately create messes just to see if they'd be cleaned. She installed cameras in every room, even bathrooms, under the guise of security. One former chef revealed that Victoria forced her to taste every dish before serving, not for quality control, but because she genuinely feared being poisoned by the help. Her cruelty extended far beyond her household staff. Restaurant servers dreaded seeing her walk through the door. She had gotten at least 7 people fired by complaining to managers about imagined slights. Store clerks learned to give her discounts just to avoid her tantrums. Even local police officers recognized her number. Having responded to countless noise complaints she filed against neighbors whose children dared to play outside. This wasn't just someone having bad days. This was a lifetime of using privilege as a weapon. A deliberate campaign to punish anyone who didn't bow down to her self-imposed superiority. Now, let's talk about Rosa Mendes, the woman Victoria had set out to destroy. Rosa's journey to America began with a mother's desperate love. Back in Mexico, her children faced limited opportunities, struggling schools, and uncertain futures. She made the heartbreaking decision to leave them temporarily with her mother, promising to send for them once she had built a stable life in America. Those first years were brutal. Rosa worked 3 jobs at once, sleeping only 4 hours a night, sending every spare dollar back home. She cleaned office buildings at night, served breakfast at a diner in the morning, and did laundry services in the afternoon. After 3 relentless years, she finally saved enough to bring her children to the United States. The position with Victoria seemed like a blessing. Good pay, health benefits, regular hours, and the stability her family needed so desperately. Rosa believed that working for a wealthy family would mean professionalism and respect. She had no idea she was walking into 5 years of systematic humiliation that would test every ounce of strength she had. The courtroom doors opened, and Victoria Ashford Wellington entered as if she were stepping onto the red carpet at the Met Gala. Her designer heels clicked against the floor with deliberate authority. She didn't just walk to the plaintiff's table. She glided, chin raised at a regal angle, eyes barely acknowledging anyone around her. Across the room, Rosa sat quietly at the defendant's table, her hands folded neatly, her posture radiating a quiet dignity that even 5 years of abuse hadn't broken. She wore her best dress, one she had saved for months to buy, a symbol not of wealth, but of self-respect. Rosa's dress had been purchased from Target, with careful consideration of her limited budget. The contrast between the two women couldn't have been more striking, or more symbolic. Judge Judy entered with her signature no-nonsense energy, and the case began. Ms. Ashford Wellington, you're suing Ms. Mendes for $5,000, claiming she stole a designer scarf from your home. Tell me what happened. What followed was a masterclass in entitled delusion. Victoria launched into her testimony with the dramatic flair of someone performing for an audience she assumed would be sympathetic. Your Honor, this woman worked in my home for 5 years. I trusted her with access to my personal belongings, my family heirlooms, my entire life. And how does she repay that trust? By stealing a limited edition Hermes scarf worth $5,000. She paused for effect, clearly expecting gasps of sympathy. Instead, Judge Judy's expression remained completely neutral. Continue, the judge said curtly. These people, Victoria began, emphasizing the words in a way that made several audience members visibly cringe, come into our homes, and we treat them like family. We pay them generously. We give them opportunities they'd never have otherwise. And this is how they show gratitude? Judge Judy's eyebrow lifted slightly. These people, she repeated. Victoria, completely missing the warning sign, doubled down. You know what I mean? People who need these positions. Service workers. The help. They often don't understand boundaries or respect for other people's property. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ms. Mendes, Judge Judy said, turning to Rosa, tell me your side. Rosa's voice trembled slightly as she began, but her words carried a quiet strength that commanded the room's attention. Your Honor, I worked for Mrs. Ashford Wellington for 5 years. I cleaned her home 6 days a week. I took care of her things like they were my own. Better than my own, actually. She paused, gathering courage. The scarf she's talking about, I asked if I could borrow it for a job interview. I was looking for a second job because I needed money for my daughter's dental work. Mrs. Ashford Wellington said yes. She told me I could borrow it. That's a lie, Victoria snapped, her voice sharp. Judge Judy's hand came up instantly. You will not interrupt in my courtroom, Ms. Ashford Wellington. You'll get your turn to respond. Victoria's face flushed red, but she fell silent, clearly unused to being told what to do. Rosa continued, her voice steadier now. I returned the scarf the next day, cleaned and perfectly folded. 2 weeks later, after I gave my notice to quit, she called the police and reported it stolen. She told them I never returned it. And why did you quit, Ms. Mendes? Judge Judy asked, leaning forward slightly. Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained firm. Because I couldn't let my children see their mother being treated like she was nothing anymore. Judge Judy's eyes moved between the two women, and anyone who had watched her show for years knew exactly what that look meant. She had already made up her mind. Now she was simply giving Victoria enough rope to hang herself with. Ms. Ashford Wellington, Judge Judy said calmly, let's talk about your relationship with Ms. Mendes during her employment. How would you describe the way you treated her? Victoria straightened her posture, clearly believing this was her chance to shine. I treated her exactly as an employer should treat an employee. I was fair but firm. I had high standards because I pay for high-quality work. High standards, Judge Judy repeated flatly. Tell me about these high standards. Well, for example, Victoria said, I expected punctuality. I expected attention to detail. I expected respect for my property and my privacy. Basic professional expectations that anyone in the service industry should understand. Judge Judy pulled a sheet of paper from her folder. Is it true that you called Ms. Mendes at 2 in the morning to pick up your dry cleaning? Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Once or twice, perhaps, when I had an emergency. When you employ someone full-time, they need to be available when you need them. At 2 in the morning, Judge Judy said, for dry cleaning. Your Honor, Victoria replied, her tone dripping with condescension. With all due respect, I don't think you understand the demands of maintaining a household of my caliber. These things require round-the-clock attention. The audience murmured disapprovingly, but Victoria seemed to interpret it as validation rather than criticism. Judge Judy pressed forward. Let's talk about the scarf incident specifically. You're saying Ms. Mendes stole the scarf, but she claims she asked permission to borrow it, and that you agreed. Which is it? Victoria's expression shifted, revealing something cold and calculating beneath her polished exterior. Your Honor, she said smoothly, let me be completely honest with you. Yes, she asked, and yes, I initially said she could borrow it. But when she gave notice that she was quitting without proper warning, without considering how her departure would inconvenience me, I changed my mind. The courtroom went silent. Even Victoria seemed to realize she had said something she shouldn't have, but her arrogance wouldn't allow her to back down. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair. You changed your mind after she'd already borrowed it and returned it? Exactly, Victoria replied. She needed to learn that actions have consequences. You can't just quit on people like me without repercussions. These service workers need to understand their obligations to their employers. People like you? Judge Judy repeated slowly, her voice taking on an edge that made even veteran viewers sit up straighter. What exactly do you mean by people like you, Ms. Ashford Wellington? And here was where Victoria made the mistake that would define the rest of her life. She laughed, a short, condescending sound that echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Your Honor, let's not play games, she said. My family has been a pillar of Connecticut society for 4 generations. We employ dozens of people. We contribute to the community. People in my position have certain expectations about loyalty and respect from those who work for us. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. I see, she said quietly. And do you believe that Ms. Mendes, as your employee, owed you a different standard of respect than you owed her? Frankly, yes, Victoria said without hesitation. That's the nature of an employer-employee relationship. There's a hierarchy, a natural order. She works for me, not the other way around. Judge Judy folded her hands on the bench. So, in your view, Ms. Mendes was beneath you. In the professional sense, absolutely, Victoria said. That's just reality, Your Honor. Some people serve and some people are served. It's how society functions. The words hung in the air like toxic gas. Judge Judy's voice dropped to that dangerously quiet tone that longtime viewers knew all too well. The tone that meant someone was about to be obliterated. Ms. Ashford Wellington, she said evenly, let me ask you something. What do you think I do for a living? Victoria blinked, confused. You're a judge. On television. That's right, Judge Judy said. I work for a television network. They pay me to do a job. Does that make me a servant in your view? And then came the fatal mistake. The moment that would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform in existence. Victoria rolled her eyes and let out an exasperated sigh. Look, I don't need a lecture from someone who's essentially a servant to the television network. You're paid to do a job just like Rosa was paid to do hers. Let's not pretend you're any different from her. Can we just get to the ruling so I can get back to my actual life? The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was absolute, the kind of stillness that exists in the instant before a bomb detonates. 47 seconds. That's how long it took for Victoria Ashford Wellington's entire world to end. Judge Judy rose from her chair slowly, deliberately, like a volcano preparing to erupt. The movement was so controlled, so measured, that it was more terrifying than any explosion could have been. Every person in that courtroom held their breath, knowing they were about to witness something unprecedented. "A servant," Judge Judy repeated, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of judicial authority. "You just called me a servant." For the first time, Victoria's confidence flickered, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. "I simply meant that we both work for someone. There's nothing wrong with—" "Be quiet." The two words sliced through Victoria's explanation like a blade through silk. "You've talked enough," Judge Judy said coldly. "Now, you're going to listen." Judge Judy reached for the thick folder she had prepared the night before, and Victoria's face went pale as page after page landed on the desk. "Mrs. Ashford Wellington," Judge Judy began, her tone icy, "since you've decided to lecture me about understanding my place, allow me to educate you about yours. I've spent decades serving justice. You've spent your life serving only yourself, and I'm about to show everyone exactly what that looks like." She lifted the first document. "This designer scarf you claim is worth thousands? I had it authenticated by 3 separate experts. It's a counterfeit, worth only a fraction of what you claimed. You're suing your former housekeeper for 25 times its actual value." Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Oh, I'm not finished," Judge Judy continued, her voice growing colder. "I did something I rarely do. I contacted your previous employees. Would you like to know what I discovered? In the past several years, you've filed over a dozen small claims cases against former staff members. Every single one filed right after they quit. Every single one accusing them of theft. Every single one dismissed or settled because you couldn't prove a thing." The courtroom fell silent. So silent, you could hear the cameras whirring. "This isn't about a scarf, is it, Mrs. Ashford Wellington?" Judge Judy's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is about punishing Ms. Mendes for daring to leave, for refusing to tolerate your abuse, for believing she deserved better treatment than you were willing to provide." She held up another document, and Victoria visibly flinched. "Here's my personal favorite," Judge Judy said, opening a printed text exchange. "Messages between you and your friend Amanda Blackwell, sent 2 days after Ms. Mendes quit. I'll read them for the record." Her voice echoed through the courtroom. "That ungrateful woman actually quit without notice. I'm going to sue her for that scarf and make sure she never works in Greenwich again. These people need to learn loyalty." The audience gasped. Rosa's hands flew to her mouth in shock. "But wait, there's more," Judge Judy went on, her tone now absolutely glacial. "The IRS has had you under investigation for years for failing to pay payroll taxes for your household employees. You've been paying people under the table, denying them benefits, and pocketing the savings. That's not just unethical. That's criminal." Victoria was trembling now, her earlier confidence evaporating like mist under the sun. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes locked on her. "You called me a servant. Let me tell you the difference between us. I serve justice. I serve the law. I serve the truth. You serve nothing but your own grotesque sense of entitlement." She picked up her gavel. Victoria didn't need to hear the words to know what was coming. "Judgment for the defendant," Judge Judy declared. "You don't get a penny. In fact, you're going to pay Ms. Mendes punitive damages for malicious prosecution, emotional distress, and abuse of the legal system." The gavel came down with the finality of a guillotine. And just like that, Victoria Ashford, Wellington's carefully constructed world, began to collapse. The transformation was immediate, so complete that even the court staff stood frozen in disbelief. Victoria's face cycled through shock, anger, and panic. Her flawless makeup couldn't hide the truth. For the first time in her privileged life, she was facing real, unavoidable, public consequences. "Wait," she stammered, her voice cracking. "You can't be serious. I'm the victim here. She stole from me." Judge Judy's expression remained carved from stone. "Ms. Ashford Wellington, I've already explained in detail that she didn't steal anything. But apparently, listening isn't one of your strengths." "That's not fair." Victoria's voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You don't understand my situation. Do you have any idea who my family is?" "I know exactly who your family is," Judge Judy replied, calm as ever. "And I know exactly what you are. A bully who uses money as a weapon. An abuser who hides behind wealth and privilege. And in my courtroom, none of that matters." Victoria shot up from her chair so fast it nearly toppled backward. Her designer handbag hit the floor, spilling its contents, makeup, credit cards, and a handful of luxury store receipts, scattering across the floor like confetti at the world's worst celebration. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "I came here for justice, and instead I'm being attacked by someone who doesn't understand how the real world works. You're supposed to protect people like me from frauds and thieves like her." The audience erupted in murmurs. Even Judge Judy seemed momentarily taken aback by the sheer audacity of the outburst. "People like you," Judge Judy repeated, her voice low and dangerous. "Let me be very clear, Ms. Ashford Wellington. People like you are exactly why I love my job. Because every once in a while, I get to remind the entitled that money doesn't buy immunity from accountability." But she wasn't done. Judge Judy reached for one final document, her expression unreadable but resolute. "Ms. Ashford Wellington," she said, "I'm doing something I very rarely do. I'm forwarding the evidence of your IRS violations and your pattern of labor law abuse to the District Attorney's Office, with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution. Your little game of punishing employees who dare to quit ends today." That was the breaking point. Victoria shattered. The tears came fast, cutting streaks through her expensive makeup, leaving her looking like a melting wax figure. Her entire body trembled as the reality of her downfall came crashing down on her like a collapsing building. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please, Your Honor," Victoria sobbed, her voice stripped of all the arrogance it once carried. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said about you being a servant. I was upset. I made a mistake. Please, don't do this to me." The desperation in her voice was raw, almost pitiful. This was the same woman who had strutted into the courtroom treating everyone as if they were insects beneath her designer heels, now reduced to begging, like a sinner at the gates of judgment. Judge Judy watched her breakdown with the detached calm of a scientist observing a predictable reaction. "Oh, now you're sorry," she said evenly. "Now you want to show remorse. Where was this humility when you called me a servant? Where was this attitude when you referred to Rosa as these people who need to learn their place?" Victoria's trembling hands reached out toward the bench. "I'll apologize to her. I'll apologize to everyone. Please. I can't afford this. My family will disown me if they find out." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same woman who had bragged moments earlier about her family's wealth was now claiming poverty. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice sharpened to a blade. "Ms. Ashford Wellington, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson. When you treat people like servants, when you abuse your power, when you weaponize the legal system against the vulnerable, eventually, you meet someone who doesn't care about your last name or your bank account. Today, I'm that someone." She raised her gavel. "The judgment stands. Ms. Mendes is awarded full punitive damages, plus legal fees. You are also ordered to cease and desist all further contact with her or her family. Any violation will result in criminal charges." The gavel came down with the sound of thunder. Victoria collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking from the force of her own undoing. Rosa sat motionless, tears streaming down her face, not of sorrow, but of long-awaited justice. After years of silent endurance, she had finally been heard. Judge Judy turned to her, her tone softening. "Ms. Mendes, you've carried yourself with dignity and grace throughout this proceeding. I'm sorry for what you've endured. Take this judgment. Take care of your family. And never bow to bullies like her again." The courtroom erupted into spontaneous applause. From the audience, the staff, even the camera crew, Victoria was escorted out, her sobs echoing down the hallway like the ghost of her former arrogance. But the story didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Within hours of the episode airing, the clip exploded across social media: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. Everywhere you looked, people were sharing the moment Victoria called Judge Judy a servant and the devastating seconds that followed. The internet dubbed her Servant Karen. Hashtags trended worldwide. News outlets ran headlines like "Entitled Heiress Destroyed by Judge Judy." Legal experts praised the ruling. Social advocates called it a turning point. Late-night hosts replayed the clip to roaring laughter and applause. But the real-world consequences were far worse for Victoria than viral infamy. Her charity boards quietly demanded her resignation. Her country club suspended her membership. The social circles she once dominated slammed their doors. The IRS investigation that Judge Judy had referenced accelerated. Federal agents arrived at her estate with subpoenas and warrants. They uncovered years of unpaid payroll taxes and falsified records, a mountain of debt, penalties, and looming criminal charges. Even worse, a dozen of her former employees came forward, inspired by Rosa's courage, with their own stories of abuse, wage theft, and exploitation. Together, they filed a class-action lawsuit seeking millions in damages. The woman who had terrorized her staff for decades was now staring down financial ruin and potential prison time. Meanwhile, Rosa's life transformed. The court award allowed her to pay for her daughter's long-delayed medical care and enroll in a nursing assistant program she had always dreamed of. Local businesses, moved by her story, offered her flexible work so she could study. Months later, Rosa appeared on a follow-up segment. She had completed her certification with honors and was working in a hospital where patients adored her. She was saving to buy her first home. When Judge Judy asked how she felt about Victoria now, Rosa smiled gently. "I forgive her, Your Honor. I just hope she learns to treat people better. Everyone deserves respect, no matter what job they do." Victoria's follow-up was far less graceful. Court sketches from her tax hearings showed a drastically different woman. No designer clothes, no jewelry, no arrogance. Just exhaustion and regret. She pled guilty to multiple violations, receiving probation, community service, and restitution to her former staff. Her family, humiliated by the scandal, cut her access to their fortune. She sold her mansion, moved into a small apartment, and began her court-ordered community service, cleaning and cooking at a women's shelter. There, among the very people she once looked down upon, Victoria Ashford, Wellington finally learned the value of humility. The moral of her downfall was clear and resonated around the world. Privilege without empathy is just cruelty with a bank account. Money can buy comfort, status, and influence, but it can't buy respect, redemption, or escape from accountability. Judge Judy hadn't just delivered a legal ruling that day. She had delivered a masterclass in humanity, a reminder that true power lies not in wealth or pedigree, but in decency, fairness, and respect. Because in Judge Judy's courtroom, And in life, everyone serves something. The only question is whether you serve justice and kindness, or your own ego. And as Victoria learned the hard way, that choice determines everything. Justice served. Case closed.